Here we go. All right. Hey now, and how are you doing? Want to welcome you to the next episode of Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat. I can't wait to talk to Jack Nolan. I met this gentleman, and guess what? He's talking about mental wellness, and you know how passionate I am about mental wellness. So I really can't wait for you to hear his story, what he's overcome, what he does, and man, we're gonna have some real fun. How you doing today, Jack?
I'm doing great, David. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, thank you for be willing to share your story. So let's start telling everybody a little bit about your story so they know who you are and some of the things you've experienced.
Yeah, of course, David. So I turned my life around from section to success, and I've written books. I've gone on to do great things like speak at a high level for people like Sky, Barkers, and HP, amongst some of the great things that I've achieved in my life so far. But it's not always been that easy. There's always two sides to the coin. That's a little bit of the shiny side. And I'll prepare today to share with you the rusty side to that coin, the truth, the honesty, the integrity, and most importantly, that heart that beats inside my chest to share with your audience the truth of mental health, how it impacts me on a daily basis, but nonetheless, how it becomes a curse, but as well as a blessing. It's helping me move forward in my life.
Well, I'm always a take the rip the band-aid off type of guy. So let's talk about how it's not been a blessing. Let's talk about some of the situation that might be the ugly part, and then we can always finish up nicely.
Absolutely, David. So 10 years ago, my life changed, and I was, a young kid back then. I'm 29 years of age at the moment. So back then I was 19 years old, and I was just scared, vulnerable, shy, but most importantly, I had to shed that skin off like a snake and become the best version of myself. But in the pursuit of becoming the best version of myself, I achieved something what I like to call success. Now, success isn't success. It looks like it on paper sometimes, where you feel like you're ticking off all the bells and whistles that you want to achieve in your life. But on the inside, I was falling apart, breaking down, and had no idea what mental health was and how it could have an impact on my life. Before I knew it, I ended up getting sectioned for the first time as I was on the hunt for success. As I was writing books, I was working with people in the creative industries like Lorraine Keller, Amir Khan, and Team GB, and some media personalities in the UK. And, on paper, I looked like I was achieving, but in my actual mind, I was falling apart and no one knew it until it was too late. So that's my entry into mental health, my entering process. And it just hit me on the blind side. I didn't see it coming. I just thought I was experiencing anxiety and stress, but I didn't realize the extent of how serious my situation was, to the point where I had a psychosis episode, which means I lost touch with reality, started thinking God was sending me messages, started believing that I was here to save the world and be the next Messiah. It was crazy, really crazy and traumatic experience, really, not just for myself, but my family who witnessed that. So one day, I came running down the stairs in my house, and I had this idea in my head that I was gonna, create a pitch for a corporate company, which I had lined up because I was in the creative industry trying to create work for myself. So that's where that motivation came from. And it was a bit like Shark Tank or Dragon's Den, where my mum and dad sat me down and said, "Okay, what's your pitch then, Jack?" And that's when I broke down in tears, tears streamed down my face. And it was very traumatic and painful as I felt like I was talking another language that they didn't understand. And I just remember saying these words, I just want you to believe in me. The last words that I did say before I ended up getting put in hospital. And, it's really traumatic, really dark, really dangerous. But I had no idea what was going on because as I got onto that hospital experience, I felt like I was going further and further into the maze and hole of mental health. I know I've spoken for quite a bit there. My story is so big. I want to share it with your audience, and
Yeah, no,
I
that's
just
that's perfect. That's truthfully, that's my style. Is I'd rather ask you a question. This is your episode, and it's your information. You're the expert, and so while you're going through this, you didn't wear a. Was anybody kind of like aware, like you mentioned about your dad? Was he aware that you were going through that? Because that's part of mental wellness. We don't always share it, right? We can keep a lot of things. I mean, I'm a suicide survivor. The day before I attempted suicide, I was in a high business meeting. I was meeting with the CEO and senior leadership of a company. I was giving them advice and good advice. It wasn't just, stuff that I did. So
Yeah.
how were you able to sort of parse out what was happening inside of you versus what other people were seeing?
What was happening inside of me was I was just losing touch with reality because the amount of stress that I was taking on at such a young age, this race, this pursuit to be successful overnight almost, which doesn't exist. And I was running so fast like Usain Bolt that I lost that metaphorical oxygen in my heart, in my mind, and in my whole reality. And it was a tough place to be in because the further and further I went into this rabbit hole of mental health, the more delusional and unwell I became. Started to believe that I had these special powers, these gifts, and I felt like the hospital was the X-Men camp, where we've all got special abilities all here for a reason to try and save the world. But reality hit me when I was sat there next to a patient in the hospital who was ordering a takeaway. And he was going, I'll have some chicken nuggets, I'll have some chips, I'll have a burger, I'll have a kebab. And then as he said the last thing on the phone, it was, where is this pizza getting delivered to, mate? And that's when the patient next to me said, I'm in a mental asylum. And then I thought, oh my God, my eyes like popped out of my head and my heart pounded 100 miles an hour. And I freaked out. I thought, oh my God, this is the reality of my situation. There was no Jesus Christ to the left of me anymore. There was no three wise men on the right side of me who I believed was there, all these delusions that I was having. It was real. I was in a mental health hospital and that like freaked me out because I thought, oh my God, I'm not mental. All these sort of thoughts that coming through your head, like, what am I doing here? There's nothing wrong with me. So I jumped on the phone to my mum and dad after begging the nurses and the doctors to give me a phone. And I said, please, mum, dad, you need to get me out of here. I said, there's nothing wrong with me. I don't know what's going on. I said, Jack, listen to me. You've had a psychosis episode. You've had a mental health breakdown, Jack. And I was in my mind thinking, oh my God, like, what is this? There's nothing wrong. I can argue with him on the phone. There's nothing
Right.
wrong with me. It's a bit more extreme than what I'm telling you. There was a lot more tension in my voice, and a lot more, seriousness going on. But I was just like so like gone mentally that I was arguing with mum and dad over nothing other than the fact that I was just polar and I was just having a bad moment in my experience of mental health. So when that phone call ended, I was emotional and my mum and dad rushed to come and see me as soon as they could. And from that experience, it really opened my eyes up to like mental health can affect anyone. It doesn't matter who you are. You could be a superstar. You could be a successful businessman. You could be a goal-getter like myself back then, trying my hardest to pursue and build my life. But it doesn't matter who you are or what you do. It can affect anyone and it doesn't take any prisoners. It can just grab you like that. And you don't expect it to happen to you. And you don't expect it to happen to you or anyone you know, but it does happen. And then when I was in the challenging situations, I thought, what can I do to make the best of this situation? So I just started trying to inspire people in the hospital and make that place a little bit better. And some of my best motivational speeches came from saying to them patients in the hospital, listen, I know there's no hope. So let me be the hope. Let me be your North Star of inspiration and motivation. We can get through this together. We've all got gifts. We've all got talents. We can actually make something in our lives. And this is just part of our journey. It's part of our story to become the best version of ourselves. So that's how it went down. And me helping them helped me. It really gave me that fulfillment, that purpose to wake up every day with a sense of excitement that I was going to help save someone today. I felt like a superhero without a cape almost. But the thing was, I was so, determined to get myself well that the pursuit of getting myself well again after being like seriously delusional, you know, was surreal, a big transformational journey.
Yeah, you sometimes don't know, right? So I guess nobody really knew. They just thought you were motivated, doing the things, because they didn't know. They don't know what's in our head, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. They don't know how we're managing the stresses of life or not managing it, right? So
Yeah,
all of
yeah.
those things are things that we have to learn how to do that. So, okay, so that phone call. So when they ask you to pick up some pizza, that is the thing that sets you back. That's the other part of, everybody's story, that moment that snaps you back to reality. And that, even though you were still stuck in section in the hospital, but
Yeah,
you then knew that was your moment of clarity that you had to get out and realize what was not real to what was real.
yeah, absolutely, David. Like, if it wasn't for him ordering that takeaway, I would have probably been in that hospital a lot longer. You know, it would have took me a longer time to get back to reality because I didn't know what reality was. I really didn't
Right,
until someone
right. At
said it
that
like
point,
that.
it had blended. The two had
Yeah,
really blended, and so I guess one of the questions is, how do you now know when reality blends differently, right? I mean, we're still going to have stress. I mean, we're never
yeah,
going to not have stress. That's part of the living human experience. But
absolutely, mate.
what's one way that you now cope with it or set up red flags that, if somebody sees something, they can kind of bring it to your attention differently?
Yeah, it's just if I start behaving in a completely different if in a completely different way to my personality. You know, like I know who I am now. I've got 10 years being out of hospital. I've been in hospital twice, and I got a diagnosis of bipolar. So that helped clear a lot of things up and made sense of my life and the journey that I've been on with my highs, lows, and swings and roundabouts. But I take medication for one, and I've got an underactive thyroid, so I take medication for that as well. So I have two medications that I take every day. It's part of my routine after brushing my teeth and getting ready and getting dressed. So that's what I stick by. I don't drink. You know, it's been about nearly 6 years at the end of this year. I will be sober. So no
Congratulations.
alcohol influences. Oh,
Huge.
thank you, David. And then I'm just like so focused on my future, what I'm trying to do, and having a purpose behind what I'm doing. You know, without actually like being erratic, behaving erratic to try and get there, doing everything in a signposted, methodical, logical, and as best possible way I can, basically. You know what I mean? In a safe way, without like doing anything extreme that's going to cause me harm or cause me stress or, challenge myself in a way that has a negative impact. So that's that's one of my fundamentals that I use. And it's not always easy. You know what I mean? It's not always going to be a good day or, every day, but I try my hardest to win more days than I lose. And that's like the biggest thing that I can possibly share with your audience is as long as you're winning more days than you lose, you are a winner. So don't get upset with yourself if you're having a bad day or you feel guilty if you're stuck on the couch and you're not getting up and you're not moving. Bipolar, depression, anxiety, overwhelm, stress we all experience it. You know what I mean? But we experience it at different levels. So if you're going through a bit of a day where things are not going right for you and you're feeling fatigued and tired and you're on the couch, you can't move, you can't function, don't beat yourself up about it. You know what I mean? Just give yourself that time to come through it,
Right.
so then you can come through the other side and be productive in the moments when you've got that energy back.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like you definitely know, and that's a really important message is to understand that there are going to be bad days, right? You're not going to have the rest of your life sunny days and green lights and things like that. Those days that you need to take a break, you're allowed to take a break, and you might not know
Absolutely.
when it comes up, but the idea is to make sure that when it does come up, you use your resources. What are some of the resources you use now to make sure that when you're feeling less good, that you're able to continue on and give yourself that breather, that air,
Yeah,
deep breath, take into what's going on.
absolutely, David. So I speak to my family a lot, my friends, my family. I signpost them with where I'm at, what's going on my journey. And sometimes I'll just pick up the phone to a friend and I might get upset and I might cry, you know what I mean? Because of what's going on. And I don't understand why that happens. It's not all the time, thankfully, but I'm not afraid to share my emotions with my family and what's actually going on and signposting them with how I'm feeling. That's the biggest thing that I can encourage anyone to do is just signpost with people who you trust where you're at in your life and what's going on and where you're at on your journey, and not beat yourself up. You know what I mean about where you are. Like if I look from where my starting point was, being the shy kid, scared kid, quiet kid, getting sectioned, coming out of that section experience, writing a few books, getting in Waterstones, writing more books, then getting sectioned again for the second time, then bouncing back from that, and then working with venture capitalists, and then getting, stung by them when I was a week away from getting my dream to become a reality, and then bouncing back again to then speak at a high level on different stages and different corporations, as well as some people in the educational system with young people. If I look at a journey, I am a success. I might not be millionaire right now, or I might not be, thousands and thousands of pounds in my bank account and stuff like that. But that doesn't matter. That does not determine my success. What determines my success is that I'm following my mission and looking at where I've come from on my transformational journey to where I am today and think, you know what, I am successful. You know what I mean? I just have to wait for the rest of the world to catch up to where I am with my viewpoint of what success may be for me. But that doesn't mean that I'm any less of a success because I've not got X amount of digits in my bank account. And the same with you, David. You're a success. You're doing this great podcast, sharing a great message, and you're determined, and I can see it in your face how like focused you are on this mission. That does not mean that you're not a success because you're not Joe Rogan yet. You know that
Yeah,
just
no, exactly. And everybody has a different level. I mean, look, I'm not about to challenge Joe Rogan, but it's also there's a lot of things that he does that we wouldn't want to aspire to do either. I'm here,
absolutely,
and
David.
I know by talking about mental wellness and the resources, we're going to help people. I know there's going to be
One hundred
somebody,
percent.
one person who hears it. I always use the example of my TEDx talk. When I did my TEDx talk, wasn't a great performance, whole bunch of things. But the best thing that happened out of it is I spoke to 8 people who were going to attempt suicide. And then I also spoke to some families who their members had already attempted suicide. So guess what? You help people. That's it. You don't know where when you go speak, and so some people over the pond here might not know.
Yeah,
Like Sky is one of the big TV. The companies that Jack is speaking at are not just these little companies. You might not know them because they're not relevant here in the United States, or we don't know about them. But these are the biggest companies going into speaking, and you don't know because I know I worked corporate America for many years. So I know there's a lot of people in companies who are going through this, who need to hear the messages that Jack does. And he definitely pulls together his family as his resources. When I was a recovery coach, I used to create wellness plans. And when I went through my situation, I created a wellness plan, and I said, look, if you see me doing things that are out of the area, not that you disagree with me, but it's something that's unsafe, you have permission. And I've given people permission to go to mental health professionals, call in these people when there's a problem. And,
yeah,
to this day, one of my best friends, Stacy, we check in each on the morning, just, hey, good morning, not, hey, how you doing? And, some days are good and some days are not good. And, when it really gets more dark, and I don't get dark anymore. I don't want to say that everything's well, everything's not well, but learning those things are really the powerful thing. And one of the things I wanted to share a little bit about, so your family is so important to you, and I
yeah,
know that you've kind of been inspired to write some books related to your grandfather. Why don't you tell us a little bit
yeah,
about that?
yeah. Of course, yeah. So again, 10 years ago when I was at the start of my journey, my dad used to share like personal stories with me about when his dad used to like, raise him and the influences that he had in his life and, all that kind of stuff. But my granddad was a bit of a villain in Manchester, let's just say, with some big organizations and groups that was involved criminal ways. And I heard all these stories and it was like, this was just like sparking my imagination for like the next Peaky Blinders, like I wanted to really like fictionalize these stories and create my own world inspired by my granddad so that his legacy can live on through my work. But most importantly, we can share a positive, way of using like fiction to create books, to create creative products, scripts, books, novels, all that kind of stuff. Um, to share them stories around the crime world, but then put a positive spin on it to say, look, this is like the consequences of how these stories end. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So there's a positive, uplifting message within them, even though it's quite dark, gritty, and gangsterish, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
but everybody loves to hear those stories, right? It doesn't matter where you are. Um,
Yeah,
those things happen. I mean, right? Let's be honest. And it's
yeah,
also there's the grittiness, but there's also I always talk about it. So I run a charity called Goons for Good, and it's like a joke on the 1920s gangster. But the one
yeah,
thing that I would talk about is really the camaraderie, right? The connection these people had. For the most
yeah,
part, if you broke the rules, you broke the rules. But
yeah,
when you didn't break the rules, you were family. It
absolutely.
didn't have to be blood, but you were family. And
Yeah,
while they were doing it, they just felt that they were supporting their families.
absolutely, mate. That camaraderie on it, and I feel like I sense my family's got that camaraderie how we all support each other, whether it be business, life, or wellness, health wise. We all we all got each other's backs. And I was talking to my dad about this last night in my local pub. And I said, I'm so grateful for like the family that I have and the relationships that I have with my brothers, my mum, my dad. Because without them, I wouldn't be here talking to you, David. I could have been in a proper dark place still. You know what I mean? And I might not even have been here, as scary it is to say, but without the love and with the love and support of my family, I've got through the darkness, I've got through mental health, I've achieved my personal definition of success, and I've had my losses and I've had my wins, as we all do in life when it run an entrepreneurial journey. But experience is what you win when you lose. And without that experience, we've got no stories to share. So, it's better to have them stories. They become a part of your success. So when you get to the point on the top of that mountain, whatever it might be, metaphorically speaking, of course, we get the opportunity to share our wisdom with the world. How great's that? Like not a lot of people get the opportunity to do that.
I agree. I sometimes, there's been times that I've sat in that why me God situation. I've had a lot of things throughout my life that have brought me, some really weird stories or really opportunities. And until I sat down to think about, even in my worst situations, what was the good out of it to pick it out. And I know you talk a lot about mindset and like a bulletproof mindset.
Yeah.
So I'd love to help us understand what you mean by that, to make sure that you don't go back. We all have things that are going
Yeah.
to set us back, but not to back to where you were.
Yeah. So what helps me my bulletproof mindset is that I've got this passion and an obsession with personal development. From your Anthony Robbins, your Eric Thomases, and even your David Goggins. Leaders like that and gurus who are, at the top of the industry, at the top of the space, top of the mountain. And I just love learning from them as successful people. I've been blessed enough to have some conversations and built some relationships with some successful people who I see as successes in my local community in Manchester, from business leaders to entrepreneurs to CEOs, and learning from them and talking to them and building their relationships coming from the standpoint of, and saying how much I've got to give as well as how much I've got to learn, and being a mentee to these individuals is something that has helped keep me on a success path. I'm not going backwards, because we all go through adversity. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter whether you've got £1 million or you've got zero. It doesn't matter where you are on the level of life. You know, it can affect anyone, and we all know this. But as long as we've got our health, we can always got the opportunity to get our wealth. To get our wealth, whatever that may mean for you, whatever it may mean for me, whatever our success is. We've always got a fighting chance as long as we're here today. I genuinely believe in that. Like 100%. There's nothing that can stop me. There's nothing that can stop you other than one person, yourself. So that's where that bulletproof mindset came from after going through them experiences in hospital, writing down on the hospital whiteboard all my goals, all my dreams, getting told by doctors and nurses, this is grandiose behavior as part of your bipolar, and being able to proudly tick off each goal that I achieved in real time and say, I made it. You know what I mean? I might not have got all the way to the end of the race with some ventures, but I've got the opportunity to get in the race.
Yeah, and
Not a lot of
I
people
gotta
are
say,
given
you're
that
still young.
mindset.
You're not an old guy like me. But I still feel young. So like I'm 57. So like where you are, there's still so many years. You try to explain to people, and I know when I was your age, not to
Yeah,
sound too old, but like you think that it's just as good. You have to be there. There is no race. There's no finish line because even now the finish line keeps moving for me. I have all these
Yeah,
books coming out. I have all these different things, podcasts. And what do you do? So there's no finish line, but you don't
yeah,
have to feel the pressure of getting there. You'll get there when you get there. Everybody
yeah, yeah,
has
yeah,
their
yeah.
own timeline. You know,
Absolutely.
yeah.
It's 100%.
Yeah. So how do you turn setbacks to, any sort of setbacks now to kind of fuel you to move forward?
I use it as motivation and a smile, even if I'm feeling a bit of pain.
Okay.
Because like you've got to laugh about it, and you're like, I lost a multiple seven-figure venture capitalist deal 3 years ago now. And I still have memories of when I was in the office and I had my own office and I was building a team and I was working with amazing professionals who was running big production companies. And I felt like the Pied Piper taking everyone on a journey, and I had all the backing and support, and I felt like the man. But the best thing what ever happened to me was probably that falling through, because it taught me humility. And at that point, I didn't have that many failures because I was experiencing rejection, but I was pushing forward and achieving and achieving and achieving. And then I thought to myself the other day, actually, when I was talking to my dad, thought if I would have succeeded and got this film off the ground, then, I would have thought I was bulletproof. And even though I've got a bulletproof mindset to overcome adversity, but I would have thought, I had the Midas touch and I could have created a bigger risk for myself and lost everything, in a different way. So, sometimes you feel like you're invincible, which is it's great to have that mindset. But when you feel like you can walk on water, that's when you find out you're not Jesus and you can sink. You
Yeah.
know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
So
Yeah. No,
that's
and you
some
you said something that
perspective
was
on
really,
it.
was great that I love that you said something about failure, but also rejection, right? So failure
Yeah,
is giving up on that. Rejection just means it's not yet, or this
yeah,
opportunity didn't work. That's a huge change and a huge shift in what we do and how we think about things.
yeah. 100%. Because you have to see every no as an opportunity to grow. That's the best way of looking at it. Breaking down that definition. What does the end to no mean? Well, new. So what does the O mean? Opportunity, new opportunity, next opportunity. This is the mindset that I started to develop earlier on when I was pursuing getting my books published and, you know, becoming the best version of myself. And it all comes again, it stems from that personal development, because you have to listen to it so many times to the point you almost brainwash yourself for success, because when you get a note, it's like, right, I'm ready. Let's go. This is part of the
Yep.
journey, part of the
Right.
story, part of the
Even
experience.
a failure, even something that's not successful, it's a learning opportunity versus, you know, oh my God, nothing
Yeah, yeah,
becomes
yeah,
an oh
yeah.
my God, it
It's not a
becomes.
shock factor. It's like I knew this was coming. What can I do next? How can I sneak around the house? How can I, get through the front door? How can I get around the wall? All these metaphors. You got to think of ways of putting yourself out there in a positive, creative way to make yourself stand out, so you can be seen, heard, and create them opportunities.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And so one of the things that I'm always curious about, um, traditionally, when one of the goals, and I'm sure your goal as well, is men, and like we need to talk about it a lot more, right? We grew up in a society, right? Men are protectors. They have to, here in the States, if you got hurt playing football or soccer or anything,
Yeah, 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 yeah. I get it.
you don't cry, rub it off, walk it off.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
but that's not always the best way to go. Rub it off or push it down
yeah,
isn't a great way to do it. What do you think? How do you think men could open up without feeling weak? We don't care about judge. I'm gonna take.
yeah.
Like people go, oh, but you'll be judged. I don't care. You're being judged either way, right? Uh,
Absolutely, yeah,
but I also argue that there's a lot of strength in showing who you are with your emotions.
yeah, yeah. 100%. It takes courage to be vulnerable. You know, it
Yeah.
takes fearlessness to be able to stand there on a stage or have a conversation or speak to your friend or pick up the phone and say, I'm not okay. But as soon as you can do that, that's when you start making the first steps towards becoming okay again, because it's a transformational journey in your mindset. You have to sort of like you take all that weight off yourself. And as soon as you can have that conversation, say, I'm not all right, you've got rid of it, then you've aired it, and then you can start to think about the solutions of how you can get better. And there's a lot of tools out there where it be getting therapy, talking to your doctor, addressing how serious the situation is, and then, getting some medication, going to the gym, getting some exercise or a light walk or some exercise in whatever capacity you can manage for yourself. Eating healthy, again, that's a big one. I know
Yeah.
we all take it for granted, the foods that we can eat, but I eat fish, chicken, tuna, steak when I get the opportunity to. It's quite expensive. But, finding the ways around, eating healthy and being disciplined with that can really improve your mental health and your well-being.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. But that's one of the things I wanted to know what your resources are now, and the things that you do. But you mentioned the gym and moving, right? So a lot of
Yeah,
times when there's a difference between being sad and clinically depressed, right? So there's but
yeah,
when you feel like you can't move, that's why it snowballs. You have to
yeah,
try to move yourself to the best of your ability, and because that it's that moving that the energy, and when we move the energy, it really becomes something bigger than what we are.
yeah, 100%. I was thinking as well the other day when I was in the sauna a few weeks ago, I thought it's hard to feel down and depressed when you're in that much heat because all you
Yeah.
can think about is trying to focus on your breathing.
Yeah.
It's so important. So that's what, and you always feel refreshed when you come out of a sauna. You always feel better in yourself after a session in the gym or a walk around the park, just getting outside in the sunlight. It's a mixture of like, environmental, changing your environment, getting you
Yep.
into a different state, as well as emotional, talking to your friends, talking to your family, and then your self work, your inner work you have to do on yourself, reading, self development, personal development. It's a range, like it's like instead of just being one dimensional with one thing, it's having a collective of all these different resources around you that help maintain your well-being, from medication as well, not in forgetting that, that plays its part as well. So it's just having all the resources and not being afraid to take advantage of every single one of the resources. Because why wouldn't you want to make yourself better if you had all the access to these tools?
Right. That's the question that we always have to ask is, what are you using your tools? I mean, for me, when I attempted suicide, I wasn't using my tools. So I need now I know when I'm stressed. I've shifted a lot of things in my life and found some of my triggers, but having that conversation around, hey, I'm not doing this anymore. And
Yeah,
that was the final one because actually 2 weeks after my attempt, somebody called me mental case, white trash. They called me some names that could have sent me back to
yeah,
where I was. And I basically took that stand on saying, hell no. Uh, that's not who I am. You
amazing.
could see me, that's how you want to see me. That's fine. I
Yeah,
can't stop people for judging and things like that.
yeah.
What do you think is something that's most misunderstood about mental health?
That we're just crazy, violent, and the way we're portrayed in the media and films kind of like stigmatizes us to be like, oh, he's going to go around and start attacking people and he's going to start doing X, Y, and Z. Be dangerous, be aware, stay away, stay away. And that creates this isolation and stigma, especially when you're trying to build relationships with people. Or I've been in the business scene, where it comes to a networking event and I share my story with people, or people might say, "Oh, what do you do?" And I go, "Oh, I've turned my life around from section to success." And their eyes light up, and they like, what they're thinking, and they're like, but then
Yeah.
when after they've heard your story a bit more, and the fact that you've worked with Sky and you've written books and you've turned your life around, that's when they're like, sometimes they relax a bit and they're like, "Oh, that is okay. He's okay. Yeah, it's sweet. He's not going to attack me." You know what I mean? But it's sad. It's sad to see that we're living in this world where mental health is so stigmatized, and the way we're portrayed in the media and films and fiction and stuff like that. There's always like they always put down the axe murderer who's got mental health,
Right.
issues, or
Right. That's the
American Psycho, or whatever these crazy films to create. They always give them a mental health illness. They're not, they can't just accept that they're just bad people in the world, and that every bad person in the world has to have some kind of mental health
yeah.
illness.
Well, well,
Unfortunately,
well, that's the part that I always talk about. Everybody always. So if you have, if you have a partner, your kids, uh, you know, you get upset. Somebody cuts you off while you're driving and you
yeah,
curse or yell. that's a little bit of a mental health issue, right? Yes, it's a response, but depending on how, if you're just like, oh darn, that person cut me off, that's fine. But a lot of people get into cursing and hitting their steering wheel and things like that,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
right? That becomes different issues, and that's where we have to all recognize we all have it a little bit, and it's a disease. It's like having a
yeah,
cold. You know, you might be more susceptible to XYZ than I am, and that doesn't mean. I mean, there's people who this time in America we're having allergies, right? All the trees are
yeah,
growing, all the pollen's out there, and there's more people who have allergies. And
yeah,
you don't go, oh, okay, you have allergies, and I'm going to stay away from you. It's
yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's same thing with substance disease, and when we treat it as we all have it, or we all know
yeah,
somebody who has it, it's not a hidden thing, and that's
yeah.
really the big story here is making sure it's not visibility. So you're a speaker. How did you get into that, right? So not only do you have a great story, but how did you work so that way people can sort of trust you, right? To get by
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah, of
that know,
course.
like, and trust.
Absolutely. So again, when I was in hospital, I'd write down on the whiteboard, I want to speak for corporations,
Yep.
and I had these big goals that I set for myself that was safe, moral, and ethical. They might have not been, seemed to be realistic by others, but I just believed in myself. I had to back myself with that focus and determination to give myself a purpose to move forward. So, with that being said, I ended up getting help from a charity when I came out of hospital the second time round, and I started getting support there, therapy, and I volunteered. And then one day, these corporate people came into the charity. It was like Camelot Lottery. I'm not sure if you've heard of them. They're like a lottery in the UK.
Yep.
Um, and there was like Hewlett Packard and Barclays Bank and a few other like individuals. It was like directors and executives and CEO type level people, C suites was there. And as I'm giving out like biscuits and cookies and sandwiches and waters, I've summed up the courage inside to say to myself, before I leave this room, I'm going to pitch myself to these individuals. I know it might be against the charity's rules, but like Eminem says, you only get one shot and one
Right.
opportunity.
Take it, right?
So I
Hamilton,
took
right?
courage on
Take your
myself,
shot. Yep.
took my shot, yeah. So I pitched myself. I said, I've got books in Waterstones. I've done this and I've done that. And they're the greatest speeches they ever gave was in hospital, but I'd love to bring them to stage with your organizations, like your AGMs or whatever events you may be having. I'd love to give my value to the world if that's an opportunity there. I've been more than grateful to do that with you. And then I didn't hear nothing for weeks. And then I got a phone call off the charity out of the blue. And I thought, oh no, is this them about to shout at me? So we found out you've been pitching to everyone and all that kind of stuff. And they said, oh, Jack, we've got an opportunity for you. I said, oh, what is it? Oh, Camelot Lottery wants you to do, they've requested yourself personally to come and do a talk for them at their big AGM at the end of the year. I was like, oh my God, no way. So I was like, so in like disbelief, couldn't believe that I had this opportunity created for myself. And I told my mum and dad, which I was really scared to tell because of the previous experience I had in the past with pitching to them about my dreams and goals.
Yeah.
But I said, look, mum, here's an email. This is Camelot Lottery. They want me to go and do a talk to about a few hundred people at a big stage, big event. And I can't believe it's going to happen. And they're even going to pay me as well, which was an amazing experience. Get paid to do something that you're passionate about is always a bonus. And the impact that I could have on the people's lives in that room was just incredible. So like I just got on the big stage there, like I felt like a mini Tony Robbins, David. There was like screens and everything. I was like, wow, I thought this is like my first proper big speech, you know what I mean? I've done schools in the past, but I mean when I first came out the first time. But at this level, this was like next level for me, about to forge my future. So I'm there and I'm giving my story and I'm like, you've all got the spirit of a lion and all that kind of stuff. I said, no, I'm not moving faster, I'm not Simba, but that's what the doctors thought. And I'm sharing my story with them. And I'm like learning my ropes on the big stage. And then they all give me a bit of a big clap. And, some people stood up. And next minute, I've got people in the team who are upset and emotional, sharing their journey with me. And the Q&As are coming out. I mean, mum and dad are sat at the back of the room, dead proud. Like, how has Jack managed to pull this off again? Sometimes how is he managing to create these opportunities for himself when we all didn't believe it could happen and we thought it was just on a bit of a merry-go-round sort of thing. But ever since then, it's like what can't Jack do? You know, when Jack's got something in his mind and his goals, you know, what can be achieved? Absolutely anything, you know.
Well, I love the fact that even in your darkest moments, you wrote down what you wanted to do. You know, writing is one of those things that I tell people to do all the time is write down your goals. Let's see if they're realistic, right? You know, I want to be a
Yeah,
you know, I want to be like Iron Man and fly. That might not be realistic, but it actually is now, right? With those
yeah,
jetpacks and things like that.
absolutely, yeah,
So, you know, you never know what it is because if you can create it, if a mind can create it and it's a real thing, you could probably do it and or learn how or find somebody to teach you how to do things. So who
absolutely.
are the people that you rely on besides your family to teach you some things?
The great leaders, you know, in the world, you know, basically like your Tony Robbins and your Eric Thomases and your David Goggins and you know all your personal development gurus. You know, I study them and I study successful people. I'm very like I don't watch normal TV, David. I just literally consume like a lot of you know motivational content, personal development content, business content, your Gary Vaynerchuk's, your Grant Cardone's, you know, a mix of all different leaders, as well as I ask questions to people like, you know, who I've got relationships with, like, how does this work and what do you think about this? And they have these like intellectual conversations to like inspire myself around like success and breaking them limiting beliefs down because we've all got limiting beliefs. Even I've got limiting beliefs. I think every single person has because there's always another level, and it's just getting ourselves, you know, inspired every single day as best as we can, like to move forward. Like for me, doing this podcast with yourself was a part of my goal. You know, part of my goal was to speak 100 times as soon as I possibly could. Now it's a big goal, you know, but I see my speaking as being a guest on people's podcasts and shows, speaking in educational settings, speaking in corporate environments and SMEs at any possible capacity I can. And that's opened up these doors of opportunities to work with yourself and among many other organizations and podcast hosts. So again, it was a big goal that scared everyone. It was like, oh bloody hell, how are you going to achieve that? And now I'm like, you know, 20 plus engagements in and I'm still going. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like,
How are you not going to do that, right? That's what I'm going to tell you is, you know, you set out goals and how are you not going to do that? You know, not you're not going to stop me from doing it, and that's the
absolutely
beautiful part of your your journey that people are going to want to hear about, and I really appreciate that.
100%, you know, from books to being sectioned and beyond, you know, the world is such a massive place and so much opportunity. I always think there's like 7 billion people on the planet. That means there's 7 billion 7 billion opportunities, if not more, because every person has an opportunity. And if the more people you connect with, the more opportunities you can create.
Yeah, you just got to keep working towards it. I know we're rounding up the episode. How can somebody get in touch with you if they want to, you know, have you as a speaker or anything else?
They can connect with me on my website, www.jacknolan.co.uk, or they can connect with me on LinkedIn at Jack Nolan, Inspirational Speakers Section to Success, or on social media platforms like TikTok, Instagram, um, and wherever else. You can find me under Jack Nolan underscore YCB or jacknolan.ycb. Thank you, David. I really enjoyed being on the show with you today, mate.
Okay, thanks so much, man. You were a great guest, and I know you're gonna get your 100. You're gonna get more than 200, 300. I don't even know what number you'll get to, but I know that you'll keep pushing yourself and keep improving. And you know your message will get out there to so many people, and the right people are gonna hear it. So thank you for that.
No worries at all, David. Thank you so much for me on your show, and I hope we've inspired, helped, and empowered someone today who's listening.
I'm sure you have. You definitely have. You inspired me, and that's why I love talking about mental wellness because there's so many things that you mentioned today that I was just like, oh, that's a different way of thinking, and that's how when we all have open minds, life can change at any moment.
Oh, thank you, David.
Okay. All right, and everybody else, as always, I want to wish you peace and love because that's a great foundation. But when you bring a bat, just be awesome today. I love you and thank you so much.